There are 8 million objects on display at the British Museum in London. Anybody know that? I mean, it's amazing. 8 million objects. So one can never go through the British Museum and hope to absorb it all or even just a portion. But there is an exception, and that is 100 curators from that museum took 4 years to go through every artifact to come up with just 100 objects out of the 8 million. 100 objects that best describe the human story through history. This audacious project was completed last year with a hidden agenda, not just to display key artifacts, kind of turning points in history, but showcasing a mere 100 objects in this vast collection that really best define who we are. The oldest artifact is a 2-million-year-old chopping tool made from stone, found in Tanzania. The curators refer to it as the beginning of the toolbox. Now, my personal toolbox at home never really advanced beyond the stone that you use for, which I guess defines me to a certain extent, too. One of the more surprising objects, startling really, that the curators decided to select as one piece is a David Hockney 1966 etching of 2 men lying in bed side by side. The curators maintain that etching defines our human uncertainties about what society finds acceptable or unacceptable, the limits of tolerance, individual freedom, and shifting moral structures. In essence, we are defined by perplexing questions about right and wrong behavior, a significant factor in the shaping of human history. Apparently, the curators received a lot of unsolicited advice about which objects define us in today's world, ranging from an iPad to Botox needles. But the final object selected was a plastic, solar-powered light about the size of a coffee mug that came with a charger and cost $45. The curators explained it this way. It can illuminate an entire room, enough to change the lives of a family with no electricity. It is a transformative object, one that sets people free. Because once they have access to solar power, they have access to the internet, and then they have access to the world of knowledge. Now, aside from my fascination about the goal of the project and the process they went through, I got to thinking more broadly about, wow, what defines us? And think about it. What is it that defines who we are? I mean, there's definitely a kernel of truth that the objects chosen to represent humankind over the course of 2 million years reveals much about what makes us tick. Many of the objects chosen embody some intriguing tales of politics, power, social history, human behavior through many millennia. But I sometimes feel that, we are more than simply the sum total of the objects displayed at the British Museum in London. An alternative, of course, is discovering how the core of our being may be defined by examining the research relating to the human genome. This reveals the human interior structure basically shared across the entire evolutionary tree. We can count microbes and human cells and determine how they all interact with our DNA, which contributes to our individual and species identity. However, I'm not really satisfied in my search for what defines us in learning that the boundary between us and chimpanzees is very slim. Makes me a little uncomfortable. I don't find it particularly helpful. Nor is my thirst quenched when I discover that the DNA of the Neanderthal man resides in me still today. Although I know many guys, including myself, who have been labeled as Neanderthal men in the course of our lives, I feel that does not define who I am today any longer. Recently, a 70-year-old friend of mine retired. He's very bright, articulate, with a brilliant career, I guess, behind him now in innovative technology. He consulted for Microsoft up until recently. And now he's retired, kind of severed from the center of what he had embraced so passionately. He lives in a lovely home along the Columbia River Gorge. Has a lovely wife, intact family, grandchildren close by. But you know, he has fallen into a depression. He claims he can no longer define who he is. His life, for him, has lost all relevancy. And he raises the question if our works, or perhaps our passion, are they what define us? That which makes us feel relevant to the ongoing conversation in our respective fields of interest, that's what defines us. Well, I don't know. I mean, for many of us here, I'm sure that rings with a certain kind of truth. After all, how many of our conversations begin with somebody asking you, what do you do? God, they might as well ask, who are you? And the response will most likely be, an accounting of the kind of work that you do. And if you're not working, who are you? I've been reading with interest lately about the late Steve Jobs, who actually was trained in Zen Buddhism. Now, if I infer correctly, I think Jobs would credit experiential wisdom over empirical analysis as a life-shaping influence. I think it's safe to say that he, Steve Jobs, was a whitewater rafter more than a jet boater. Jobs would probably contend that what defines us is made up more of intuitive powers than rational thought. After dropping out of college and wandering around India, he learned the power of imagination and how to apply that. He is compared at times with Albert Einstein, both for his level of genius and for his emphasis on imagination, that is, imagination over knowledge. Imagination is that which allows us to think differently and thus defines who we are. Although Einstein was not a religious person, he describes his intuitive genius as the ability to read God's mind. When assessing a theory, Einstein would ask himself, is this the way God would design the universe? By the way, the Nobel laureate physicist Niels Bohr famously urged Einstein to quit telling God what to do. It took all of about 18 hours following Steve Jobs' death before all the negative stuff began being posted. One was Steve Jobs is not God. There was one that was even less kind, saying Steve Jobs was a jerk, on and on. It was just the backlash against Jobs took him from divine to demonic in a heartbeat. It was a short sainthood for Steve Jobs. But then quite the opposite, quite the contrast happened to Kurt Vonnegut. Before he died 4 years ago, he told his biographer that his reputation had plummeted. and that the only way to regain credit for his earlier works from the 50s and 60s, which college kids just loved and devoured, the only way for him to come back up, to rise up in the world, was for him to die. So the question is, if we're defined by the likes of Steve Jobs in our lifetime or defined in death, like Kurt Vonnegut. I find neither a satisfactory way to get to the heart of the question. To put it simply, I think the question of what defines us has less to do with artifacts, our jobs, our DNA, our imagination, life, death, and deals actually with some of the very basic, most fundamental theological tenets. Wendell Berry frequently alludes to our insatiable desire for more. Our insatiable desire for more. It drives us. It drives the world. It stems, he says, from our sense of incompleteness. And so it kind of raises an interesting correlation. We strive for more because we feel incomplete. Steve Jobs trying to get in touch with us.